Hello, welcome to another great episode of Royal Black and Elite. I'm Lady TrenettWilson, your lecturer and social historian. And here on the channel, I like to bring you different types of Black history. That's Royal, Black, and Elite. And today's story is so very much aligned with that because I also like to bring you little known stories. I thought their story was interesting enough to bring it to you because they were conjoined twins, but they were still able to build a very prosperous career. Thank you for joining me for today's lecture as we meet Millie and Christine McCoy. Known as the Carolina twins, these ladies were born on July the 11th, 1851, in Whiteville, North Carolina. They were born into slavery, and their father's name was Jacob, and their mother's name was Monimia. And they were owned by a blacksmith named Jabez McKay. Now, you'll find out why her name was McCoy, because normally during slavery time, they were the slave was the name of the slave owner. But these ladies had banks, so things were a little different for them. Their mother and father had had 7 children before the twins were born. They'd had 5 boys and 2 girls. But when Millie and Christine came along, they were unique and different. They were conjoined and they were connected at their lower spine and they shared a pelvis. But they had their own arms, their own heads, and they were their own individual people. Now, when the girls were born, the economy of the U.S. had definitely begun to change. In the past, it had been mostly rural, and now it was moving toward more urban cities industrialization. Well, in that, of course, the people wanted to be entertained, and often their entertainment was people. And the twins were some of these people. Now, there was a lot of racism back then. Of course, there was slavery then. So, of course, there was racism. But the thing about it is, they exploited anybody who looked different or who had a unique characteristic and something that they called freak shows. Now, freak shows were a part of like carnivals and festivals and fairs that were really starting to come on the scene at the time. The people wanted to be entertained. And so this was their entertainment. The difference, though, between what the Carolina twins endured and some of these other people endured was that they were enslaved. Slavery didn't end until 1865 when the Emancipation Proclamation, the Civil War, and then finally the 13th Amendment was signed. So here they were being exploited for free. And it began when they were only 10 months old. Their slave owner would allow people to come to their house to just gawk at them. And when they were, like I said, 10 months old, he sold them for $1,000 to a showman named John Purvis, who then kicked back a percentage to McKay. So everybody was making money except, of course, the girls. So Purvis then sold them when they were only 24 months old to a man named Brower, who exhibited them in the first state fair in North Carolina in 1853. Now, these are little bitty toddlers, you all. The people went wild, they loved them, but Brower got swindled. You see, a man convinced him that he had some land in my home state, Texas. Now, what he did is he said, listen, I have this land that's worth about $45,000. That's what I'll pay you for the twins, for the McCoy twins. So he said, oh, okay, well, that's a good deal. I'll do it. Brower sent the girl to the Texans. As you would know, he never sent anything back, never sent the deed to the land, and Brower was left penniless. But the thing about it was, Brower was financially backed by this man named Joseph Pearson Smith. So since Brower was left pretty much destitute, Smith now owned the promissory note, and he was now the owner of the Carolina twins. Millie and Christine were then handled by a lot of different managers before being reclaimed by Smith in Britain in 1857. So Smith traveled to Britain because he wanted to get the girls back. And, he brought their mother, who they hadn't seen since 10 months old, to convince them to come home. And she did. They had been separated. I'm sure it was a very emotional time for mom and the children. Well, they were women by then. He and his wife provided the twins with an education. They taught them how to speak 5 different languages, how to dance, how to play music, and how to sing. Now, on January the 1st, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation ended the slave status of the Carolina twins, and they were no longer anyone's property. Before their emancipation, the girls had been showcased in fairs and at freak shows, so now it was their opportunity to be free. Though the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed, the girls were free. They were free to leave Smith, do whatever they wanted to do. Smith didn't want that. He was making money from them. They were his cash cow. So he was going to try to kidnap the girls and take them away so no one would be able to find them. But here steps in their mother and father. And by then, her dad was able to buy the farm that was previously owned by the plantation owner McKay. So they were in a much better position to be able to help their daughters. So they went to something called the Freedmen's Bureau, and it helped them to come back in 1865. But then they got sent back to Smith. So it was a big old mess. But Smith had hid the girls in Europe, and he had coerced them to sign a contract that stipulated they had to stay with him for 5 years, promising the twin parents a part of the profits. Well, the twins' parents was like, no. They went to the Freedmen's Bureau, and the Bureau ordered the girls and the Smiths to show up on November in 1865. Well, they showed up, but they showed up without the girls. So they were thrown, well, the woman was thrown in jail. She was arrested. The bureau agent Clinton A. Clenny ruled that since they were grown, they could conduct their own negotiations for a contract. And it also enabled their dad Jacob to negotiate on better and fairer terms before they would return with Smith. At that point, they had already made about $500,000 in that time period. So they were well off. And so they knew that they were going to be exploited. But if they were going to be exploited, they were going to be exploited on their terms, especially since they were free at that point. With their wealth, they bought their family a home. In fact, their father, Jacob, had already bought the McKay's farm. So when they returned back to that farm. So they had money. They were known to have opened schools. They had wealth, they had land, and they were truly able to live at least the end of their life after they were freed the way they wanted to live. They really had an illustrious career, and on October the 8th, 1912, Millie and Christine, at 61, passed away of tuberculosis. It said that Christine passed 12 hours before her sister did, which, I didn't know that could even be possible. So, but it was, and she passed away. They were buried in an unmarked grave, but in 1969, they were reinterred and they were moved to a funeral site in Whiteville. So that is the story of the Carolina twins. They had been exploited. They had been moved from here and there, been stripped away from their family. But most of all, a lot of times people will tell you they can't do something and they have all these obstacles and all these excuses. But yet these girls who had been sold since they were 10 months old and were conjoined twins were able to make the most of it and not only impact themselves and be able to take care of themselves, but they were also able to be a blessing to their family and their community. And what I love most of all, as I looked for photos to share with you of these girls, I found nothing but them looking fly from day one. I mean, you could tell they were well taken care of. They were beautiful. They dressed well. And some of the pictures, you could see that they were in bondage. You could see the unhappiness. But then some of them, as they got older, you could tell that they were finally free and living on their terms. Either way, like I said, they were not broke. So that's what I mean by bringing unique stories. Was that not unique? Had you ever heard of these young ladies? I think that we should know all of our history. I hope you enjoyed today's lecture and learned a lot. As always, my lectures are for entertainment and educational purposes only, and my information came from the National Museum of African American History, Wikipedia, and the documenting of the American South. Thank you for joining me for another great episode of Royal Black and Elite. Thanks for watching.